Welcome everybody to Regeneration Speedrun Part 1 with all the case studies and content needed for the paper 2, which is in around 10 days. I don't know. I don't have the timetable with me, but yeah, let's get right into it. So, as usual, content to cover, every part of the spec with something to say, but disclaimer, for this part, I feel that Regeneration was parts of the spec were very wishy-washy and very vague in the sense that you actually sometimes don't even know what they're talking about. I remember encountering this problem when I revived Regeneration, but nonetheless, I will try to cover as much of it as I can. But I can't guarantee you for some certain parts, but will have something to say. But that will be down to you, and I'll teach you like the most vital case studies needed. And before we get into the main part, I'd just like to focus your attention on the exam definition of regeneration, which is the long-term upgrading of existing places or more drastic renewal schemes. Please, guys, for big mark questions, or just any type of question really, like 6 markers, 8 markers, 20 markers, make sure you define regeneration. If I ask about regeneration first, and once you define it, you can move on to the question. Alright, moving on. Top tip, regeneration is always a double-edged sword. So what I mean by this, don't talk about regeneration always in a positive light. There's negatives to it as well. And I've read some people's essays. They overly praise regeneration schemes and it acts as if there's no problems associated with it. So I've given an example below, but with regeneration of dot clones, a lot of people praise it, but there's a lot of negatives and downsides to it you can mention, which I'll go through with you later. You can pause it and have a read now if you want. But yeah, regeneration is not all sunshines and rainbows. It can sometimes be a bit of doom and gloom as well associated with it. So yeah, mention it, show awareness to the examiner. So let's move on to the content now. So we have 48.1, and economies can be classified in different ways and vary from place to place. So things to know, how economies can be classified, how different economic activities, so like different sectors, mean there's how it leads to different varying social factors like quality of life. And you need to know how inequalities in pay in different employment types and economic sectors lead to different quality of life, different aspects of different qualities of life, levels of quality of life in different places. That's a bit of a mouthful, but let's go. So the simplest part again, economic activity can be classified by sector and type of employment. Very simple, guys. You just need to know each sector and what it roughly involves and what employment. So part-time, full-time, I won't go through that, but I'll go through the first bullet point. So here's all the different types of sectors you need to know about. And again, this is the type of stuff you just name drop in your essays. And I'll just give a little example for you guys in case you guys don't have one. So primary is extracting raw materials from the ground or sea. And examples of this would be the old economy of England or UK, where there were coal mines in the northeast of England. And then there's secondary sector, which involves manufacturing and processing of these raw materials into goods. So think about how back in the day, the UK were a shipbuilding powerhouse in areas like Newcastle and Southampton, Liverpool, just those type of areas. And then here, tertiary provision of services like retail jobs. And biggest example is call centers in Mumbai and how BT outsourced a lot of their call centers are. Quaternary sector, high-tech research and design, which is what the UK is trying to shift towards. And this involves like finance, people in finance, workers in Canary Wharf, maybe perhaps engineering as well. And then the culinary sector is above that. It's just the highest level of decision making in the economy, like government officials and head scientists. And main takeaway, as I said before, you need to use these key terms within paragraphs, and you just kind of need to know like different examples so you can quickly name drop it. And yeah, let's move on to this part then. So yeah, let's move on to I think 4A1.1b now. It's a bit wild, but okay. So there are differences in economic activity, and this is reflected through variation in social factors. Again, very stupid part of this spec, in my opinion. In my opinion, it's a very obvious thing. I don't know why they even bother put this in there. It's so stupid. It's common sense. But again, I'll go through it. So essentially, regions in the UK with a high-skilled economy equals more income in the area, which means there's more investment in healthcare, which is better healthcare, which leads to a better life expectancy, which leads to a better quality of life due to more tax income, which means there's more income to be invested in education, leading to a better education. So, guys, it's that slippery slope argument here. It's the idea that regions with high skilled economies earn more, and that means more can be invested into local services. And it's a very throwaway part of the spec. I wouldn't even have this in there, but we have to go through it. And an example of this is that enrichment upon Thames. In between 2016 to 18, the healthy male life expectancy was 71.8 years old versus Blackpool at 53.3. So if you know anything about these two areas, Richmond is a very rich area within London, and there's a lot of high skilled workers based there. Whereas Blackpool, obviously a deindustrialized region or area, and hence there's a low skilled economy there, which means that again, different quality of life, different levels of quality of life. So don't deep this part too much. And the IMD levels will vary across regions. So IMD is index of multiple deprivation, if I believe. And you just need to know it in the future, which I will show you later. So again, it's the same thing as last point. So between different sectors have different pays due to their skill caps. So in London, the average wage of people in tertiary and quaternary sectors was £44,370 compared to the northeast, which is still based within the secondary and tertiary sectors, and they have an average wage of £31,200. So it's this idea that I guess higher skilled jobs pay more, and this again will lead to variations in life expectancy and just quality of life in general. So just to bring it back to the idea of a north-south divide, if you'd like. So quality of life varies, and the average male life expectancy in the northeast is 62.9 versus London, which is 79.4. So you can pause it and think about use this case studies if you want. But again, very simple. Okay, now this is more of the part where there's a slightly more case studies, but again, it's not too hard. I remember being asked about how places change in my exam one time, but I'm not sure when this was. But yeah, this is a very simple part again, but I'll just teach you how the function of a place changes over time and the different functions of land, the factors behind how a place changes, and how change can be measured. And the main part of the spec you need to understand is places have changed their functions and characteristics over time. So yeah, let's move on. So here are the different functions of land. So we have administrative, commercial, retail, and industrial. They're all very self-explanatory. So just like retail, think about your local Asda. I guess different pieces of land are used for different purposes, and that's all you need to know. And again, over time, local economies shift due to numerous factors through each function and change demographic characteristics. So yeah, let's move on. So you also need to know stuff like gentrification, which I'll teach you later. Again, guys, this is not an overly clear, part of the spec. Again, this is what I don't like about this topic. It's just not exactly clear what they want you to know, and yeah, it's a bit wishy-washy again. So, what is gentrification? I'll just run through it with you guys. So, this refers to how the demographic characteristics change, and gentrification is, I should say, the arrival of wealthier people in an urban district, which causes an increase in rents, property values, and changes to the area's culture. So the key example of this is the super gentrification of Portland Road in Notting Hill, which is in London. And back then, the area was filled with Victorian slums, and now it's a multi-million-pound housing, which again it forced the original working class people out, and now it's a very hip area. A lot of people want to live there, and it's an example of gentrification, and it changes the demographic and the age structure. So there's a lot of wealthy people compared to the working class people. And yeah, it's just an example of how gentrification can change the place, again, which is what, in essence, this part of the spec is asking about. So yeah, if they ask you about how places change, you can talk about gentrification if you'd like. And yeah, that is it for this part, and let's move on to this. All right, so here we are. So we are in 4A.2b now. So, you need to know why the reasons for a change in place, and the reasons for a change in the function of a place is due to physical factors like accessibility and connectedness, historical planning, and the role of local and national planning. So you just need to know little case studies for each of these, and yeah, let's move on to it, man. So how does physical factors like accessibility and connectedness change the function of a place? So obviously, the proximity to large cities can cause a change in an area's economic importance. So Reading, which is located on M4, which is the west of London and has good railway links with London, has meant that the area has become more of a residential commuter town, just purely due to its connectedness to London. And since it's cheaper than London, a lot of people choose to commute into it from close by towns. And yeah, that's an example of just like physical closeness and how that changes a function of an area. And historical planning. So, how does historical planning change a function of a place? So, the previous development and knowledge of locals mean that people are more suited towards an industry. So, just imagine historically, if you're really good at maths, um, let's just say an area is really good at maths, they're obviously going to want a base. And loads of people are good at maths in that area. A lot of, like, I guess, maths companies, if that makes sense, will choose to base there. And it's just like acquisition of local talent, and the place is used to it, so they would rather just make it easier for themselves. Businesses would rather make it easier for themselves and hire people with the knowledge to work in that industry. And yeah, so again, Reading is another example. It's part of the M4 growth corridor west of London historically, and since it's been a centre of footloose industries and services since the 1970s. So again, it's just like over time, an area becomes more specialized and they change a function of a place. And how does the role of local and national planning change a place? They change the function of a place. So obviously, government planning can limit or increase growth of certain areas. So think about conservation areas, greenbelt areas. Those limit developments on an area, and perhaps you can argue that they limit growth. And a good example of this would be Middlesbrough, which suffers from a lack of planning and investment and thus undergoes deindustrialization, hence changing the function of a place. So it's just an example, again, is how governments can be a blessing and a curse. They can invest or reduce investments in an area, causing the place to either succeed or fail further. And another one I didn't put in here, but you can say globalization can change a place. I mean, think about the global shift in manufacturing, and the globalization of trade meant that there were cheaper manufacturing costs overseas. So, key time you can use is the global shift towards Asia, global shift in manufacturing towards Asia, and places once industrialized like London's east of London, and the east end of London, sorry, has its economy shift towards tertiary and service industry as a result to meet with this change. So yeah, this can be applied across to like places like Newcastle as well, but they sort of have to shift towards a new industry or a new sector because of globalization and the cheaper cost of manufacturing overseas. All right, and here, um, the last part of this part, I guess, is change can be measured using employment trends, demographic changes, blah 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 blah. So very self-explanatory, but in short, you measure change using the factors above. So like deprivation, employment deprivation, health deprivation, blah blah blah. And change can be actually measured using something called the IMD, which I mentioned earlier, which is the index of multiple deprivation. And it's just the idea that you can use different factors to measure changes in an area. And yeah, the big one I would say is the IMD, which is Index of Multiple Deprivation. And it's an index that attempts to quantify deprivation in England using 7 like big domains or factors with different weightings. So just some background information. You don't have to write this if you don't want to. The IMD splits England into 33k small areas with 1,500 people in each, and it measures income, employment, education, health, crime, barriers to housing and services, and living environment. And the word next to it, so These are the weighting. So income is a large weighting of this index, and employment is a large weighting in this index, whereas living environment is less of a weighting. So yeah, I would say it scales with the importance of different factors, and it combines them into one index or one figure we can use, and that is a way you can measure change of a place. So moving on, we have 4A.3, and again, this is such a stupid part of the spec in my opinion. They could have literally just said, find some case studies about regeneration, and yeah, there's a lot of things to know, but it's just far too much waffling in this part of the spec. Look how massive it is. And yeah, so essentially what you need to know is the big case study of the London Docklands, and you just need to know like its history, its background, how it's become Canary Wharf today, and yeah, the decisions leading up to it, and in general, how regeneration has changed the area. And in these questions, they always talk about a local and a contrasting place. I sort of cheated here back in the exams. I remember using any case study I remember as my contrasting place rather than having a set place that I could study about. So yeah, that is my advice for you. If you struggling on a contrasting place, you can use basically anything really, unless it specifies you can only use one contrasting place, which then you probably will be a bit screwed. But again, guys, just have two big case studies for regeneration, and I will teach you about the London Docklands. So, um, the Docklands regeneration. What do you need to know about it? So, the background: in the 1800s to the 1950s, it was used as a port to import and export goods, and it was home to the poorer working class East End community. And as part of Thatcher's strategy, or what's it called, her no reign, but her time in the office, when Parliament, the Docklands was to be regenerated. And again, you can talk about global influences. Like you can argue, actually, you don't need to argue. You just know that it is due to globalization that this Docklands experienced deindustrialization. So you can mention that. And how was the Docklands improved economically? So there was obviously a land use change, which is the biggest thing, to tall skyrise buildings, which led to the knowledge economy growing. And remember what I said, guys, the idea that the UK, in response to the global shift, are trying to shift their economies towards a more of a quaternary sector rather than tertiary to become more high skilled. And investment banks like HSBC chose to base in Docklands, and this has caused Canary Wharf to become the second CBD of London. So CBD meaning Central Business District. And again, another benefit of the regeneration project was that the Jubilee line, which is the tube line, the London Tube, was extended to Canary Wharf, and the DLR was developed, which is the Docklands Lights Railway. And yeah, if you've ever been on it, it's really slow. I have massive complaints about it, but yeah, I mean, I guess back in the day it was high tech. Now it is so slow. It's ridiculously slow. And the London City Airport was built in 1987, which is 5 kilometers from Canary Wharf. Like, guys, there's no coincidence that Canary Wharf, one of the biggest financial districts in the world, is situated next to an airport. They've literally tried to increase like business trips and stuff like that towards London and gear London towards more of a financial capital. Is what Thatcher tried to make London into, or just the UK in general. And the Limehouse Road link was developed, which is just a road. And I guess, and if you know anything about infrastructure, if there's better infrastructure, there's more connections, and obviously Canary Wharf will be more economically viable as a place to invest in if there's more infrastructure. And how has the population and housing improved? So there's large scale immigration, sorry, to East London due to employment. So now London is, I mean, Newham, which is around Canary Wharf, is London's most ethnically diverse borough. And obviously, the older population moved out the Docklands area, and now there's a more of a younger, youthful population, so that are ready to work. That is something you can mention again. And I guess to talk about the strength of the regeneration project is that obviously there was just improved transport links with DLR and the London City Airport, and just in general increased economic growth. So some key Statistics. So Canary Wharf has become London's second central business district, and now today 100,000 commuters go to Canary Wharf every day, which is a lot of people. So a lot of high skilled workers, and just a lot of job opportunities within the area. And again, when talking about the weaknesses of Docklands, it actually hasn't removed all deprivation. You can argue this actually has polarized differences between within the region, as obviously setting up a knowledge economy knowledge economy with companies that only hire with people with like from the top end in top universities has meant actually that the most deprived people haven't actually benefited as much as I guess a lot of MPs and prime ministers would have liked or have said or promised. So yeah, the area surrounding Canary Wharf, Newham, is still the most deprived borough, which is very surprising. You'd think that for such a big economic growth would lead to better local services, but no, hasn't happened. And yeah, Thatcher introduced a scheme called a right to buy scheme in 1980, and this actually increased the proportion of private housing and decreased council housing. So again, guys, you can see like it wasn't in the best interest of the government or the Thatcher regime to, I guess, what's it called, to help the poorest. They actually started to polarize differences even more by reducing council housing, and the organization responsible for the regeneration project, the LDDC, so London Docklands Development Corporation, were given more power than local councils. So you can see here, guys, if if the corporation responsible for regeneration was given more power, that leads to less consultation with local councils to create sustainable developments, and obviously the development was less holistic. And again, what happens then? What does this mean? Is that the people who are the most deprived aren't actually benefiting from the increased economic growth. And another one would be that this whole scheme was focused on economic development and basically nothing else. There wasn't much environmental regeneration or social regeneration going on. And on the flip side, you can talk about the opportunities it has created today. So obviously, there's increased employment. So there's 100,000 commuters going to Canary Wharf per day already, and obviously a younger population. So the average age in Newham is 31 compared to the average age of London, which is 39, and it has allowed for a larger workforce, a youthful population, and yeah, I guess more innovation. And again, migration of skilled workers creates a more diverse economy. But let's look at the threats as well as the opportunities. So the most obvious one is that the Canary Wharf is based literally next to the Thames, and with climate change and sea level risings and flood risk increasing, there is a risk of Canary Wharf being flooded. And again, another threat is that a lot of low income families are forced out due to increased rent and higher cost of living. So a lot of, I guess, housing developments in the area obviously will be focused on high skilled workers who can afford luxury housing, and this will price out obviously the most deprived. And again, local councils will lose power as the LDDC were given priority. So yeah, moving on, we have another example of a regeneration scheme, which is the Canning Town and Custom House community-led regeneration scheme, and the need for regeneration. So this is just another example of a regeneration scheme, and the background of this is that Canning Town and Custom House are in London, and it's 20 minutes away from the Docklands. And in 2001, there was high unemployment with only 37.6% of adults in full time work. There was unaffordable housing with 71.6% being rented in 2001. Poor education. You can read the rest of the statistics. But yeah, the area required high regeneration. And as a result, here are the outcomes of it. So the regeneration has actually improved areas. So it's planned 10,000 new homes with 3,500 already completed, and this will reduce homelessness. There are new town centre, leisure, health, and community facilities, and there's a proposals for the regeneration of estates, and residents will be put in a ballot. So again, notice how there's always the focus on community here and reducing homelessness. And in general, they've just improved access to DLR and Jubilee lines, and the Elizabeth line is soon to come within the area, so it'll further increase connections with other parts of the area. And there's an ongoing development of a strategic riverside walkway. So if we talk about just infrastructure investments and stuff like that, this is what's going on. So yeah, I just added an extra bullet point here. So in general, this is just to create a larger mix of private and social housing. And again, it's a very bottom-up strategy compared to the Dockland strategy. So you can argue, like, yeah, you can compare. If it asks you about the relative success of schemes, you can always talk about how bottom-up always is better socially, whereas top-down is more focused on economic growth. And that is just a key thing you can note. And yeah, let's move on. So you can actually link the Docklands and the catch scheme together. So if you can see again, I literally pointed out here on Google Maps, it's a 20-minute, sorry, it's not a 20-minute walk, it's a 20-minute tube journey, which is very short between the two places. And since the areas are too close, just read on the screen, I always argued that the economic success of the Docklands will increase income for the local council to invest in other regeneration projects, such as the Canning Town one, so the catch scheme. And this is a great counter argument to the idea that Docklands regenerations has driven local people out and not benefited the most deprived. So yeah, I always think these two case studies together. I talked about how these schemes can actually, I mean, how top-down schemes can actually drive the economic growth needed to make more bottom-up schemes. So yeah, it's just a little link you can make if you want, and yeah, it's a great point to make if you can pull it off. So here we move on to 4.8.4. So it's just the idea of successful regions, unsuccessful regions, and what makes them successful and what makes an area unsuccessful. And also just the idea that regeneration priorities are different in different areas. So yeah, let's get right into it then. So for successful regions, you need to know San Francisco and Sydney. So yeah, you just understand how both of these are so successful and its pitfalls. Sorry, I didn't write Sydney here. I was drafting this up at like 11 p.m. So yeah, let's go through San Francisco and its strengths. So obviously it's a global city with high economic importance. Since the California gold rush, which turned it into a financial center of the West Coast. With like in New York, you have Wall Street. In San Francisco, you have Montgomery Street. And since the mid 2000s, companies like Apple, Facebook, Twitter chose to base in San Francisco, and now it's considered a global hub for tech startups. And a big one you can talk about is 87% of the population have access to high-speed internet. So you can do a lot of there's a lot more employment opportunity types, and you can do a lot more like hybrid and remote working, which is the fad these days, as people like to call it, or blah blah. And then its weaknesses. It's high cost of living. Everyone in San Francisco you've met probably complains about the cost of like groceries and stuff. And the median price of a single family home is $1.65 million in 2019, which is ridiculous. It's such a massive price. And another big thing that deters people is high taxation rates, with 12.3% for earners above $572,000. So yeah, high taxation rates mean that you end up with less money at the end of the day. So yeah, bad things, it's a weakness, and it deters potential investors. So what are the opportunities for San Francisco? Like, since it's so good, what are the new opportunities? So obviously the biggest one would be the growth of the tech industry, with 6% of people in San Francisco working in quaternary sector compared to 21% in 2019 who work in the quaternary sector. So you can just see there's a massive growth within 6 years. It nearly tripled the quaternary sector. So it's just this idea of this growing need for the knowledge economy will mean that this area, San Francisco, will grow. And in 2004, they had a tax exemption for biotech companies, and this encourages more high-tech companies to base, or biotech companies to base within the region. So again, it's establishing new industries, and it's these policies that have created the success and opportunities for San Francisco. And over 50% of the population have a 4-year uni degree. So again, this is like a blessing and a curse. You can argue this makes it successful as there's a high talent pool, but there's also massive competition. So not everyone will be on the top jobs. And yeah, these just all could be strengths as well. But yeah, you can just, it's opportunities and strength, you can balance them out, and they're basically the same thing. And what are the threats to San Francisco? So if you ever watched that rock movie with Alexandra Daddario, I think they talk about the San Andreas Fault, which is such an informative, realistic movie. I really recommend it, guys. But yeah, it changed my life watching The Rock and Alexander Daddario in the San Andreas Fault movie. But yeah, moving on, I'm waffling. So it lies on the San Andreas Fault. It's very prone to coastal flooding, and housing prices are 70% higher than the US average. So obviously, this would deter potential people wanting to move there. And there's high congestion, which increases commuting times, which again, just quality of life things people want to think about. And moving on to Sydney, which is another successful region, which I forgot to put down, is it's obviously got high employment with a young, economically active population, and it's the leading financial centre of the Asia Pacific region. And half of Australia's top 500 businesses are in Sydney, with over 450,000 businesses alone in Sydney. And just some strengths again, it's 10th in the world for quality of life, and the average income is 7th in the world, which is very high again. Uh, there are some weaknesses to Sydney, though. I guess the growth of Sydney would mean that rural areas of Australia are declining due to the loss of young people, due to brain drain. And again, it's just an expensive living cost, and it's geographically large, which is very means it's very hard to maintain, to govern, and just to like help reduce crime rates and stuff like that. With such a large area, then have to. It's just very difficult to get to different places within the city. And yeah, that is just some things you need to know for the successful regions. Now we move on to the unsuccessful regions, which we'll be talking about the American Rust Belt and how it's been unsuccessful with the history and what are some opportunities it presents. All right, moving on. So talking about the Rust Belt and how it's been unsuccessful. So just some background history on the American Rust Belt. It's just an area within like the Midwest of USA to like the north of the south of USA. And yeah, it's just become deindustrialized. It was once the world's biggest heavy industrial region with coal, and it supplied Europe with steel after World War II in like the 50s for rebuilding and stuff like that. And this caused industries to boom. And obviously, since the industrial shift of manufacturing and steel production to like Asia, really, it's really meant that a lot of jobs have been lost, and as a result, it's causing deindustrialization. And the weaknesses today are that a lot of high income jobs in primary and secondary sectors have been replaced with low wage tertiary jobs in retail, and local governments pay out these low paying jobs. And there's obviously, since it's such a deindustrialized regions, it suffers from brain drain, as a lot of younger people leave to find work in different states. And there's a high unemployment rate, which has led to a lot of crime and dereliction in areas like Detroit and Baltimore. So if you watch a lot of movies, Detroit is always portrayed as, and Baltimore are always portrayed as terrible places, and it's really because of all the factories that were used to base there that all shut down really due to global shift. And another weakness would be it has low spending revenue for local governments. But since there's so many people claiming welfare payments, there's actually increased spending with lower budget for the government, which is very bad and it's not sustainable. And however, this region is not all doom and gloom. They were subsidized by the US government, 2.9 billion. Where that means there is a potential. There is a potential in this region to redevelop, regenerate, and yeah, I guess make the place better again. But this is also a threat since it's so reliant on these subsidies to just continue operating. Any form of cut in government spending on the area will mean disaster for the area. And also, since the area is so deindustrialized, and yeah, this means that there's low land prices, which means that investment and regeneration opportunities for larger companies if they do want to commit to the area. And just some other threats again. Obviously, the most major one would be the global shift of manufacturing towards Asia, which was the biggest threat, and it's proven to be the biggest threat since you just can't compete with Asia in terms of manufacturing at the moment. And there's just the improved technology, which has allowed for processes to be mechanized, which means machines do the job instead of actual people. And if you know anything about these Detroit and Baltimore areas, a lot of people are low skilled anyways. So having a machine do their job would just mean leave no job opportunities for these low skilled workers elsewhere. And I guess lower wage costs in the southeast of USA, in areas like Alabama, Virginia, and Texas, is actually creating competition. So notice how whilst there's competition globally, there's also national competition. So an example of this would be between 1993 and 2008, 80,000 jobs were lost in car manufacturing within the region in areas like Michigan. But during this time, 90,000 jobs were actually gained within Alabama, Virginia, and Texas. So you can see how just lower wage costs in different states can actually create national competition. So it's not just the global shift, it's also cheaper wage costs in different states that's causing this threats to the area. All right, and we move on here to 48.5. But before we do that, again, guys, for this part, you just need to know like what makes a successful region. And obviously, for 4A.4C, the idea that regeneration priorities are different from different areas, it's very simple. You just need to know like in areas with high economic growth and high quaternary sector, such as San Francisco, the need to regenerate or is less. And I guess in areas like the Rust Belt, there is a high need for regeneration, and obviously they're focusing on job creations, better social welfare, and stuff like that. So, again, guys, very wishy washy. So, yeah, let's move on to this one. So, 48.5 are significant variations in the lived experience and place and engagement with them. So, the things to know essentially in this part of the spec is the examples of wide variations in engagement within a community. So, yeah, I'll give an example of, I think, the voter turnout in the 2015 election. And you need to know the reasons behind the variations in engagement and how contrasting views can lead to conflict due to different opinions on what regeneration needs to focus on. So, again, guys, this is a very, again, there's three case studies again, but it's just such a boring part of the spec. Like, I nearly fell asleep doing this whole video because so far, what have you done? What we've went through? It's the most boring things ever, and I just can't. I really want to get this part done with so we can get to the main part of it. But yeah, so there are wide levels of variation, and you need to talk about the main one here, which is the UK 2015 general election. So 78% of people aged over 65 voted, compared to 43% aged 18 to 24. So yeah, it's just this idea that there's different engagements in different groups of people. So when I mean engagement, I mean engagement in just like within politics and within the country and different schemes, government schemes, the engagement. And locally, there's like places like Stoke only had 51% turnout compared to East Dunbartonshire. I'm not even probably pronounce that in Scotland with 82%. And it's just a general idea that turnout is lower in deprived inner cities and higher in wealthy suburbs and commuter belt regions. Keynote proportion of men and women who vote are very similar. And I guess another big thing you talk about is the type of jobs people have. That also affects engagement within governments and stuff. So professional and managerial turnout was 75% compared to manual workers with only 57, and only 55% of ethnic minorities chose to vote. And this just shows various factors play a role in engagement. And we'll go on to more case study stuff. So, yeah, it's the idea of lived experiences varies according to age, ethnicity, gender, length of residence, and just how does this affect engagement within a community. So, the lived experience is, this is how I defined it, is how a person's life perspective is formed from their past experiences and can be affected by things like gender. And the five things you need to know that affects engagement within a community is age, gender, ethnicity, length of residence, deprivation levels. So here we have how age affects engagement. So obviously, when you're retired and older, you have less activity. You don't have a full-time job to commit to, so they will have more time to dedicate to their community. So those over 60 are more likely to vote. And an example of this would be there's always a higher turnout compared to the rest of the UK in Cornwall, where 18.7% of the population are aged 65 to 84. This is the 2011 census, so it's a little bit outdated, but you get the gist of it. So if there's more old people in your region or your area, people are more likely to engage with the community. Now, how does gender affect engagement? So, um, I guess more women are more likely to engage in community projects compared to men if they are looking after a child. So we look at traditional gender roles, and we see how it's usually the mother that stays behind and looks after the child, whereas the men go out to work. This is a very traditional role. Guys, don't cancel me. I'm just relaying what information I learned. And but the key thing you can note here is you can argue that due to the rise of, I guess, more access schemes for women, or the rising role of women in professional roles, is breaking down these traditional roles, and the gap is closing between men and women. So it's generally equal, but I guess it's gonna become closer to a 50-50 split. And how does ethnicity affect engagement? So obviously, the views of a non-white British person will differ from another person's, and the feeling of hostility and being left out could deter voting and engagement. So we talk about areas with ethnic diasporas, like in East London, there's a large amounts of South Asian populations and clusters, ethnic clusters. And if they feel like the sense of hostility and being left out of government policies that only affect what seemingly like British people, traditional British people, they will be deterred from voting and less likely to engage, and they will be less likely to develop an attachment to where they are staying. And this obviously is outlined by the fact that only 55% of ethnic minorities voted in 2015. So yeah, ethnicity does affect it. It's just like this idea of lived experience, and if you're being feeling left out, you're less likely to vote. So we move to the length of residence. So obviously, new migrants may have a weaker attachment than long-standing locals, and you can easy case study for this would be the 2011 census, where Cornwall had 400 short-term residents living in the UK for 3 to 12 months, and it is unlikely for them to engage with the community since they are staying for such a short time. And finally, deprivation. Deprivation is often associated with anti-government and anti-establishment views, and those in social housing may feel less attached compared to a homeowner. And yeah, it's just this idea of being left out again, since they see all these government policies, they feel that it's not being affected by them. It would mean that they feel a sense of resentment and would rather not associate themselves with the government, leading to less engagement. But just a little thing to note here: when some of the factors can combine, and in this case, when deprivation is combined with ethnicity, it can actually increase engagement. So an example is this: the 2001 general election, where the East London Bangladeshi voting, as in voting turnout rates in this Bangladeshi East London community was higher than the average London community, even though this area was poorer. So you can actually say that like prejudice and exploitation can increase engagement, and it is this, I guess, this this prejudice against people would actually drive them to want a change in a sense. So yeah, again, it's not too hard, but you just need to know how roughly it affects people. Again, it's a bit common sense. I feel like this part of the spec again is so stupid, but yeah, we move. All right, so moving on to here, the conflicts can occur among contrasting groups and communities that have different views about priorities and strategies for regeneration. So, obviously, regeneration plans can often lead to conflicts due to varying opinions. And here are some case studies: so, studentification, lower village sink estate tensions, and Barton Farm urban fringe regeneration tensions. So, it's the conflicts caused by studentification. So, this is the process in which neighborhoods become dominated by student residential occupation, causing a change in its function. And it's just this idea that cities with universities, a lot of developments and regeneration projects will focus on housing students. And this often leads to conflicts. And a good example of this would be Queen's University in Belfast, where 50% of immediate housing around campus is student occupied. And this will actually create tensions as younger students bring antisocial behavior, which angers local residents. And yeah, it just creates tensions between people. So, an example would be between students and local residents, and another one would be tensions between governments. This also creates tensions between governments and residents, as the local residents will look to the governments to make them do something about the situation. And yeah, so this has led to the government attempting to limit student occupied housing, and this further creates tension between the government and students. So you can see how studentification is also a key player or driver of conflicts. So here we have another one. So the lower Fudge sink estate. So sink estate is basically a council housing that's characterized by high deprivation, and it's a 1970s sink estate. So yeah, it's quite outdated, but it's just a sink estate that has about 1,000 people, ranked as one of the most England's most deprived areas in Rochdale, and there's conflicting views on its future and whether to destroy it or not. So local council and some residents want it demolished. And here's just some things I found. So a resident thinks it's outdated. A asylum seeker finds it nice. Yeah, but despite like the many problems and high deprivation in the area, a lot of people call this estate their home, and it's that a lived experience. You don't want your childhood home to be destroyed. And there's some people that just want to demolish it and regenerate the area, while some people want to retain the community and keep the sink estate. So this is a very general example, but again, conflicting views of whether to demolish something or not. And we move on to this one. So this is more of an example of how regeneration can actually generate larger conflicts. So there's a urban fringe regeneration in this Barton Farm area, which is a greenfield mixed development, and they just attempted to build 2,000 homes with 800 social housing, primary school, shopping centres, blah blah, in the open space. And yeah, they tried to build on the urban fringe, and this was contested for 15 years by Save Barton Farm, which is a movement. They just wanted to keep the natural landscape, and yeah, it was overturned, and now there's conflicts in Winchester about whether to uh, I guess, regenerate the area. So here we can see like affluent residents oppose the development because they don't. Obviously, if you're a rich person, so obviously some rich people don't want social housing near them. They think it's bad, and whilst like low-paid professionals and I guess people wanting to buy a house quickly would be in favor of these developments. All right, moving on. This is a very bad part of the spec. The use of I think you should just research this yourself. I can't give you one. It's quite hard if I just make you change up your local place for you. So yeah, just pause and read the stuff with Blocklands, and we should be good here. And now we move on to 4.8.7, man. All right, last part of the video before I cut off for part two. So I guess you need to know how UK government policies play a role in regeneration and how it can be a blessing and a curse. So how it can limit regeneration and increase regeneration. So the things to know: how different infrastructure investments can help regenerate regions, how planning and policies influence regeneration, and the negative effects of government policies. Alright, so moving on to the first part, you need to know that about the two case studies for infrastructure developments, which are the Heathrow expansion and HS2, which is incredibly outdated since it's being scrapped left, right, and centre, and it's just a terrible project overall, in my opinion. But yeah, I'll keep my thoughts to myself. So you just need to know how like such infrastructure investments can possibly improve regeneration prospects. So Heathrow expansion. Let's move on to that one first. What is the background about it? So the general plan is just to add a third runway. This is just to accommodate the fact that Heathrow is the fourth most busy airport globally. And what benefits would it bring economically? So it will increase flight capacity from 480 to 720,000 flights per year. and it will bring up to $187 billion pounds in economic growth per year extra. And this will lead to more investments in regeneration projects as yeah, there's just generally more income in the area. And this is also bring in more skilled migrants, which is more economic growth and for projects. And again, building a more skilled economy to drive economic growth to increase the potential for regeneration projects. Now, the economic costs. So there will be a loss of 5 million passengers in the northwest of England. And what this would mean is that 15,000 jobs will be lost in the northwest of England by 2050 if this third runway goes ahead. Since yeah, this third runway will take up more of the passengers and more flights will go to Heathrow rather than to other parts of the UK. And the expansion will lead to London and southeast England using a greater share of like the UK's national carbon budget. And what this means is that it was actually penalise like economies in poorer parts. So yeah, since airports will bring in a lot more pollution and a lot more carbon budget will be used, the area will have to pay more. The local council will have to pay more. And what this would mean would be that poorer economies or poorer businesses will be affected, and there'll be an increased polarization of the north-south divide, with the south obviously benefiting a lot more from this rather than the north of England. Now, social benefits of the expansion: 180,000 jobs will be created nationally. There will be improved capacity to 130 million passengers per year. There'll be 40 new long haul flights, and this will increase tourism or just increase connections in general, or bring in more potential for migrants to move to the UK to help like regenerate poorer parts. And yeah, there will just be a provision of jobs in general, which will lift deprived regions' employment rates. And some social costs: 700 homes to be destroyed in Harmondsworth, and new runway will lead to 725,000 living under the flight paths. And just another environmental cost, it will add 3 to 4 million tons of CO2 into the economy. Now let's move on to HS2, which is, again, I think it's a terrible, it's a very outdated case study, not a terrible case study. So it's just a high speed rail that was to connect to from London to like the north of England, but this is a failed project since the northern leg has been cancelled. So areas like Manchester and the Leeds route have been cancelled. And just mention the scrapping of these routes as a negative in the exam. There's no need to like go too much into detail about it. But the economic benefits it was supposed to bring was obviously improve freight transportation, and there would obviously be increased investment. So there was a promised £2 to £3 billion investment per year into the area, and into the sorry, not the area, the project, which will create jobs and stimulate economic growth. And the idea was to reduce the north and south divide, as the north is better connected to receive investments and commuters and workers. However, the economic cost is crazy. Um, the total cost was estimated to be 72 to 98 billion pounds in 2019 compared to 55.7 in 2015. So yeah, if you remember watching the news, if you have, you always talk about HS2. The budget was always increasing because there was so much to do. And there are cheaper alternatives to making more efficient transport systems like digital signaling. So you can say, yeah, perhaps the UK could have invested in something different. And commuters collectively must pay 70.8 billion annually to run the line between Birmingham and London. So it was going to be very expensive, and I would assume it's very expensive already. And yeah, I don't see it being a very cheap thing to take. But social benefits: uh, reduce delay and journey times for commuters, and provides employment opportunities to larger cities. So yeah, if people lived in a deprived region, they perhaps have more access to jobs. So this will actually help regeneration. And social costs, it actually may not reduce the north-south divide, as it only encourages people further away from London to commute to London. And communities will be broken up with the rail runs through like areas like Chiltern, and there'll be little benefits to those who are not commuters. So again, guys, yeah, sometimes these things aren't always positive, and in the context of regeneration, Essentially, the HS2 will have a lot of benefits, obviously, increase economic growth, but again, will these benefits reach the most deprived regions, and will they actually help? Will deprived people be actually able to afford this? We will never know. But yeah, we can move on to environmental benefits. So less cars and lorries, reducing carbon emissions, and it will reduce short distance air travel, which will also lead to lower carbon emissions. And they will lead the project was, or I'm not sure if it will or it would or was going to introduce tunnels that will be blended with nature called green tunnels, but it's not really a benefit. It's just yeah. So it wasn't going to be too intrusive apparently to the environment. And yeah, here's some environmental costs. It would obviously run through areas of outstanding beauty, which are like Chiltern, and the Woodlands Trust said 108 ancient woods would be damaged, with 21 nature reserves being destroyed for the whole project. So in general, you can just talk about how infrastructure investments potentially could bring increased economic growth for regeneration projects, but mention the downside as not always being sustainable and hence not the best in the context of regeneration. So yeah, now we move on to this part. Alright, so for this part of the spec, you need to know how sometimes government policies can restrict the opportunities for local regeneration in favour of national economic growth. So you need to know how planning policies, the government policies, restrict regeneration and how fracking affects regeneration. So planning policies, how they affect regeneration. So just a idea of what I can say is in 2016 there was 500,000 a shortage of 500k homes, and there was government policies with planning with like greenbelt areas. These can limit developments and obviously prevent new houses from being built in these regions, which can limit the amount of regeneration projects taking place. And obviously, the same goes with government conservation areas. With national parks can further restrict developments to improve social care for people and just affect or decrease regeneration rates. And how does fracking affect regeneration? So, yeah, governments often have national interests placed above local ambitions. Therefore, they mainly prioritize economic growth. So we can see how during Liz Truss's Prime Minister campaign, which was very short, she lifted the moratorium ban on fracking. And this can obviously negatively affect any form of environmental regeneration going on and also reduce land developments in favour of fracking. So, again, it's just about how governments can have policies that take up land and therefore reduce opportunities to build new buildings for regeneration projects. And yeah, it's just quite simple. And again, you need to know for this part UK government decisions about international migration and deregulation of capital markets. So you just need to know about general points about how migration and deregulation have negatively influenced regeneration potential. So yeah, we can see immigration, how immigration has increased ever since the UK joined the EU. And what this means is there's a lot of demand for new housing, and oftentimes this demand or this government policies of immigration and how the open door policy kind of thing, or how when the UK was in the EU allowing free movement of people, there was not enough houses to be going around, which means that a lot of the times regeneration projects couldn't go ahead because there wasn't enough houses in the first place. And yeah, so it just drives the mind for houses and reducing the amount for social housing. Deregulation, since the UK is very open to foreign investments, yeah, there was an estimated 40,000 London properties that were owned by offshore tax havens. And what this means is that these properties were never lived in or rented or not even used. So a lot of people just, uh, I guess, trying to avoid taxes by buying house London properties and just not using them at all, which is also taking up a lot of the London housing, causing regeneration projects to not work or less housing for regeneration projects. And again, it's the same idea for second home and holiday homes with people and Airbnb housing that is used to be rented out. That means there's less on the housing market for people. And what is the significance of this? So, this will reduce housing supplies in the longer term, which would mean higher housing prices due to less less housing in general, which means less investments, and foreign and domestic investors will have to pay a lot more to house workers or gain land. And this will mean less investments will mean less income for regeneration projects. And that is it. So yeah, that is the end of it. This was probably the most boring one I've done. But yeah, we'll see you in the next one.